We have our scripture this morning from Mark chapter 10.
Scripture this morning is Mark 10, 45 through 52. And you can follow along in the Pew Bible if you like. That's on page 1142. Mark 10, 45 through 52, page 1142 in the Pew Bible. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many. Then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road.
Thank you, Charlie. So we're talking about Mark chapter 10, verses 45 to 52. And there was a blind man. But he was probably not the only blind person around. There are some people who should be able to see, and maybe physically they can see. But there are things they don't see. There were people all around Jesus who didn't see who he really was. But the blind man knew if he called out to Jesus, Jesus could heal him. The religious leaders, they didn't really care that much about people who were impaired or who were blind and lame and so on, but this blind man had faith that Jesus did care about him. So Jesus had preached, and then Jesus, in the passage before this, predicted that he was going to die. And after this, who's got your Bible open? What's the next passage after this about the blind man being healed? What's the next thing that happens? He rides into Jerusalem in a symbolic way that he is the Messiah, the one the Jews have been looking forward to. So we have this story in between these two things, when Jesus said he was going to die, and then he's headed to Jerusalem. But before he gets to Jerusalem, this incident happens when he heals this man. What city was Jesus leaving in this story? He was leaving Jericho, going from Jericho and headed up to Jerusalem. And there was a man there who was begging, or Matthew says there might have been more than one that was there begging. Jericho was a prosperous town, so that's not such a bad place to be a beggar if you have to beg. Probably could survive, although a lot of people, after a while, they get kind of tired of beggars and then they just ignore them. There's a story in John chapter 9 when Jesus healed a man who had been born blind. And the people said, "Wow, we've never heard of somebody healing a person who was born blind." Which tells me probably this man was not born blind, but he became blind at some point in life. And I wonder, what was his name? Do you remember what the name of this man was? Bartimaeus, which just simply means son of Timaeus. It makes me wonder, had he never made a name for himself, that they always called him son of Timaeus? That not being able to see at whatever point that happened in his life, that he really did not make a name for himself? Well, you know, it's that pitiful son of Timaeus that lost his sight when he did whatever it was. And it makes me wonder, what was it too that caused him to lose his sight? Because he wasn't born blind. And how blind was he? Blind enough he had to beg. There was nothing else he could do to make a living. And what they would do is they had a cloak that would cover themselves at night when it got cool, and during the daytime they'd take their cloak and they'd spread it out in front of them, asking for handouts, and people would put things down there on their cloak, and then they'd feel to see what was there and if it was something any good or if somebody was just playing a trick on them. The son of Timaeus. But he must have been known by people in the early church, because Mark doesn't mention the names of people that are healed except for two, and this is one of them. And it just makes me wonder, why did he remember what this man was called? Maybe he later followed Jesus, was part of the church knew him. The man would cry out when he heard Jesus coming by. He cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Which is also something strange for Mark, because Mark doesn't normally use the term Son of David. But he did here. And it makes me think, as he's writing this, he's looking forward to the very next thing he's going to write down, when Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem, and the crowd shouted out, "Blessed be the one who's coming in the name of the Lord, the Son of David." And so Mark is putting this in here like a foreshadowing, like a looking forward to what yet is going to happen. This is later when Bartimaeus is standing before Jesus, he simply calls him teacher, rabbi. But shouting out, crying out, he said, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, I don't know if this man really knew what Jesus' ancestry was, if he knew that Jesus was a descendant of David, or if he was just hoping that calling out in that way, "Hey, I have hope." Or maybe he was wondering, this guy's healing people. What if he were the Messiah? We don't really know what was in his mind. And the people wanted him to do what? Just what you did right now. You saw it. The people didn't want him to speak up. Shut up, be quiet, don't bother him. Have you ever really needed something and somebody tried to shush you? And you're trying to speak up and they're just trying to shush you. Just never mind, we're past that. They won't bother with you. They're not interested in you. Just shush. Remember how that feels? And he only cried out even louder, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped. Now there's an interesting story that Jesus told, where there was a man who was going from Jericho, which was down in the valley, and he was going up to Jerusalem, and that path, that road could be a very dangerous road. If you were traveling by yourself, watch out, because people would hide along the sides and try to jump the people that were traveling and steal from them. And Jesus told a story of a man who was going from Jericho up to Jerusalem, and he got attacked and beaten and left for dead and robbed. And there was a priest that was walking that same path, but when he saw this man there beaten and at the point of death, well, he stayed far away from him and went along the other side of the road. And there was a Levite who was also heading up to Jerusalem, and the same thing, he stayed away from him. And then there was the Good Samaritan. In this case, Jesus was the one who was headed out of Jericho up to Jerusalem to something very important that he was going to do. And on his way leaving Jericho, here's this blind man who's calling out for help. And Jesus stopped. He did what the point of the story of the Good Samaritan was, and stopped to help the man before he went on up to Jerusalem. Jesus had a brief conversation with him, called him over. This Mark shows several times where Jesus would talk to somebody and see, did they have faith in God to be able to be healed? He talked to him, he said, what do you want? He said, I want to be healed. I want to be able to see. And immediately, he was healed. And probably he needed to go offer a sacrifice in the temple of thanksgiving to God that God had restored his sight. That would be a normal thing for someone to want to do when you had this wonderful healing happen. So probably, now where was Jesus headed? Jerusalem. Where was the temple? Jerusalem. It said he got up, when Jesus healed him, he followed Jesus, and I bet he followed with Jesus and the crowd that was with Jesus all the way to Jerusalem. And I bet when Jesus sat down on the donkey and started riding into Jerusalem, he was there, because he would have probably been headed to the temple himself to offer some sacrifice, thanking God for healing his sight. And when the crowd was shouting about Jesus, he was probably there telling his testimony how Jesus had just healed him and just given him his sight back. Because the very next thing that happened is Jesus going to Jerusalem and riding in on the donkey. The man who had been sitting alongside the way, verse 46, was now following with the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. And he was with him on the way to the temple of God in verse 52. What is blindness? Think about that just for a moment. What is blindness? And give me a chance to tell this story just briefly in Spanish. Entonces Jesús, saliendo de Jericó, escuchó la voz de un ciego. Dijo que él fue ciego, no fue nacido ciego. Me imagino que algo pasó en su vida para cegarlo. Quizás buscando o placeres, o haciendo algo arriesgado, o quién sabe. Quedó ciego. Gritó a Jesús que lo sanara, que no tuviera misericordia. Jesús se detuvo, lo llamó. Le pregunté qué quería. Dijo el Señor que quería recobrar su vista. De inmediato Jesús lo sanó. Hay muchas cosas que nos podemos afectar por mal. Algo le había afectado a él que perdió su vista. Y Dios nos puede sanar. Jesús habló con él y vio que él sí tenía la fe para recibir su sanidad. Y Jesús lo sanó. A lo mejor él quería seguir a Jesús, quería ir al templo para ofrecer un sacrificio a Dios, para agradecerle a Dios por su vista. El próximo pasaje dice que Jesús entró en Jerusalén, montado al burro como Mesías. A lo mejor este hombre acompañaba a Jesús y los otros, y vio a Jesús entrar en Jerusalén así. Y estaba contando lo que Jesús había hecho por él, de restaurarle su vista. El que antes estaba sentado al lado del camino, pidiendo limosnas, ya seguía al que es el camino y la verdad. Y fueron en camino hacia Jerusalén para alabar a Dios. There's some contrast here. There are some people who were blind and people who could see. They thought Jesus might be the Messiah, but Messiah didn't need beggars following him. If he was going to be powerful, he needed political allies and he needed military allies. If he was going to go overthrow the Romans, which is what they thought, And Jesus shows us, no. If that's what you think it's all about in me being Messiah, you're blind. You don't see what God has in mind. I will stop and I will help this blind man and I will help those who are in need. If you've ever been in a place where there are a lot of beggars, eventually you get to a place where you just pass by them and you almost don't see them anymore. But Jesus saw this man. He heard his cry. Sometimes we feel like, does God notice me? But he does. He does see you. The rulers were blind. They didn't see who Jesus was. And they saw blind people who could not read because there was no Braille. So they couldn't know that much about the law of God because they couldn't read about it. So they were not really spiritual people. So they really could not know spiritual things. But this man knew enough to know that he could call out to Jesus. He had faith in Jesus and asked for mercy. And when he was healed, he followed Jesus along the way. People expected the Messiah to use his connections with people to gain power, and Jesus doesn't use people. He loves people. He heals people. He blesses people. And he fulfills us with what we need in life, not use us. We can sometimes become blinded. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, there may be some place, some area of your life right now that you've lost your sight. Or maybe realize you need sight. Is there something? Is there some place in your life you're not seeing clearly? Do you need some sight from Jesus? Give me a minute. Hablando de poder ver, muchos pensaron que el Mesías necesitaba alianzas con gente con poder político o militar, y uno que estaba pidiendo limosnas no tiene poder. Jesús dijo, si eso es lo que piensan del Hijo de Dios, no es así, son ciegos. Yo sí quiero ayudar a las personas. No uso a las personas para ganar algo para mí. Los amo y los bendigo. Los que piensan diferente son ciegos al propósito de Dios. Los líderes de los judíos no vieron quién era Jesús, pero este hombre ciego vio, sin ojos, sin vista, entendió que Jesús pudo tener compasión de él y a través de Jesús él pudo recobrar su vista. Y cuando recibió su vista de Jesús, seguía a Jesús. Hay cosas que nos pueden cegar en la vida. Algunos quizás que son cristianos, siguen a Dios, tienen áreas de su vida que no ven bien o quizás han perdido su perspectiva o su vista. ¿Hay algo en tu vida en que tú necesitas recobrar la vista o recibir la vista? Piénsalo. Sometimes our desires in life lead us to do things to try to fulfill our desires. There was a man once upon a time named Evel Knievel, and he had this great desire to feel adrenaline. And he would do things in motorcycle jumps that were so dangerous. What are things driving you? Are there some needs in life or some desires in life that are pushing you, driving you, motivating you, and you're trying to do things to fulfill this? And in the process, you're becoming blind to some other things. You know, we can lose our sight that way. I wonder, did Bartimaeus, was it pleasure? Was it trying to be successful? What was he doing? What happened to him that he lost his sight? There are things that we chase in life. Some of those wanting not to be lonely, wanting to be accepted, wanting to be wanted, wanting to be loved, wanting to be successful, wanting to have more stuff. But we can get into things that will harm us, injure us, make us catch some disease, get injured, have some great heartbreak. We lose sight of what is important, and we may lose some people we really love in the process. We don't often know clearly what things are going to harm us, and so we get into things blindly trying to fulfill what we want, and then we get hurt. We think it's the right way, or we think we know what we're feeling, why we're feeling, or what we really want, or what will get us that. We think we know, but we're often blind. And so we go forward, we go on, we go for it. Like Bartimaeus, somehow he lost his sight. Have you lost sight of something? Have you lost your way in following Jesus? Have you lost your way with family, with career, with your own peace inside? Have you lost something in what you've tried to go grab? Have your fears crippled you? Have your ambitions crippled you? Or maybe, some people, they just want to be so nice, they don't want to do so much for other people, but they lose track. They become people pleasers and they lose track of what's really important. It's not a bad thing to want to be successful, to want to be loved, to want to help others, but we can pour ourselves into some of these things to such an extent that we lose. We lose our sight, we lose our health, we lose. And then we're just sitting by the side, broken. I want to be valued. I want to be accepted. I want to find purpose in life. I want to find love. I want to find belonging. And I think I see how to get there, but I didn't. And now what? Has that happened to you or somebody you know? I want to be good enough, and so I'm doing, and I never do enough. And then I lose out on my time with God. And I can't even see well enough to go find Jesus and follow him, but I'm calling out, have mercy, have mercy. Jesus, have mercy on me. I hope he will stop and help me. But people are telling you, shush, just be quiet. There's not really a God. Or you got yourself into this, why should anybody help you get out of it? Just shush. But in your heart you're crying out, Jesus, have mercy. I wonder how long he was crying out. Was Jesus walking by quickly? Was he walking by slowly? How soon did he realize Jesus was coming? While Jesus was a long ways away, did he start crying out to him? And how about you? Whether you feel a long ways from Jesus or that he's right there. Call out to him because he can heal us from the things we get ourselves into and restore our sight, and we can then clearly follow him along the way of life. What's happened? What is there in your life where you need to call out to him? Think about that. Give me a minute. A veces nosotros buscando algo que pensamos que sabemos cómo y qué. Queremos ser amados, aceptados, incluidos, bien conocidos, exitosos. O quizás queremos ayudar a la gente y en ese proceso a veces nos perdimos o perdimos lo que es más importante o nos enfermamos o perdimos mucho. Buscamos de una manera que no es lo mejor y salimos heridos. Este hombre, a Antes podía ver, pero ya no pudo ver. Nosotros a veces también, buscando lo que pensamos que queremos en la vida, lo que nos va a satisfacer, nos metemos en algo que nos hiere, a veces muy severamente. Y la gente dice, bueno, es problema tuyo. Tú lo hiciste a ti mismo. Cállate. Pero clamamos a Cristo. Cristo, Jesús, ten misericordia de mí. Y la gente dice, cállese, Dios no existe. Oh, ¿qué importa que tú te metiste en esto? Cristo, por favor, ten misericordia de mí. Y Jesús se para, nos escucha, quiere sanarnos, restaurarnos la vista para que podamos seguir el camino correcto con Él. ¿Hay algo en tu vida que salió mal? Quizás no a propósito, pero salió mal y estás herido y quieres presentar esto a Cristo. Puedes, porque Él sí nos escucha y nos puede restaurar y nos puede dar la vista para poder seguirlo a Él y el camino correcto. ¿Qué hay en tu vida? ¿Qué necesitas de Él en esta mañana? Winding things up, Bartimaeus had become blind. He was reduced to begging. He couldn't even see if what they put on his cloak in front of him on the ground, if it was good or not. He had to try to touch and figure it out. But he knew that Jesus could heal him, and if he could only see, he would follow Jesus and called out boldly for mercy. Can you see clearly? Do you need to call out to Jesus? Do you even know what will deeply satisfy you and fulfill you? Do you even know that? Can you even see that? Don't you know that Jesus, God's Son who made us, knows how to fulfill our deepest longings and needs in a way that will not destroy us, but will give us wholeness. What are you looking for? Affection, loyalty. You need wisdom and counsel. Jesus can provide these things. You need companionship. You need to be valued. You need a job. You need purpose in life. Christian or not, sometimes we lose part of our sight. You want to belong. You want somebody who wants you. Do you not know that God who created you can provide what we really need? Because He wants the best for us. If Jesus showed up, if Jesus showed you that He could provide those things you most deeply need, would you trust Him and follow Him along the way in life? In that issue that you're dealing with right now, that thing that you want to take care of yourself, but yeah, you've trusted Jesus, but not in this. If He showed you He could take care of that. Or if He reminded you of all the other things He has taken care of, would you take your beggar's cloak and throw that aside and go to Him and present to Him your need and say, whatever, just restore my sight and I will follow? What's God talking to you in your heart about this morning? ¿Qué hay en tu vida? Si Jesús te enseñara, yo sí puedo darte lo que más necesitas para satisfacerte, dejaría de pedir limosnas del mundo, irías a Jesús y lo seguirías permitiendo que Él te sanara. Will you stop begging? Stop begging from everybody else and just come ask Jesus.